In bear country, the difference between a story you tell later and a case file investigators piece together afterward usually comes down to inches, seconds, or a habit repeated 1,000 times without consequence. Until the one time it isn't. What follows are 6 documented bear attacks, spanning more than a century in 3 countries, pulled from primary sources, agency investigation reports, contemporaneous news coverage, and in one case, the victim's own camera. We're not here for the shock of it. We're here for the mechanism, what each person was doing in the seconds before contact, what the physical evidence actually shows, and what wildlife investigators concluded once it was over. Every case here involves someone who knew the general risk and closed the distance anyway. That gap between knowing the rule and feeling like the exception is where this whole list lives. Wes Perkins woke up in a hospital bed without most of his face. His nose was gone. His jaw was gone. What remained of his cheek would take 26 surgeries and a section of his own leg bone to rebuild. The bear that did it covered 69 feet in 9 steps. It happened in May 2011 on a gravel track above the Nome Council Road in the Kigluaik Mountains of western Alaska. Perkins was 51 years old, Nome's volunteer fire chief, and one of the most experienced hunters in a town that produces a lot of them. He had grown up working dog teams and hunting caribou on the tundra outside Nome, and by 2011 he had spent more days in bear country than most Alaska Department of Fish and Game biologists put together. None of that mattered in the 9 seconds it took the bear to close the distance. He was out that morning with Dan Stang, a Nome dentist, and Stang's teenage son. The 3 had trailered snow machines 30 miles out the Nome Council Road and ridden into the foothills of the Kigluaik Range, looking for a grizzly boar that had been seen working the slopes above a creek drainage. The snow was mostly gone off the low ground, but still held in the shaded draws, and the morning air sat in the low 40s Fahrenheit, cold enough that their breath hung in front of them while they glassed the hillside. They found the bear inside 20 minutes, a mature boar, roughly 8 feet nose to tail, at least 13 years old by later estimate. It was working a slope about 70 yards out, feeding, apparently unaware of the 3 men watching it from the trail below. The 3 of them had stopped on a rock outcrop that gave them a clear line down into the drainage. Snow machines parked below at the tree line. Stang's son had the binoculars up. Perkins had already adjusted his rifle sling twice, the strap catching on his pack each time he shifted position to get a better angle. The wind was moving up slope, carrying their scent away from the bear rather than toward it. Part of why the animal hadn't reacted yet, and part of why nobody in the group felt any particular urgency about the distance. Perkins had a rifle slung on his back. He also had a camera in his hand, and the boar was closer and better lit than anything he had gotten that season. He made the decision that guides make every year in bear country and mostly get away with. He raised the camera instead of the rifle. The bear noticed him at close to the same moment. What Alaska Department of Fish and Game investigators later reconstructed from the ground and from Perkins's own account was that the boar came off the slope at a dead run and covered roughly 69 feet in 9 strides, well under 2 seconds start to finish. Perkins had time to drop the camera. He did not have time to bring the rifle off his shoulder. The bear hit him standing up and took him down by the head. It tore through his nose first, then his upper jaw, then the left side of his face down to bone. A grizzly's jaw can generate over 1,000 pounds of force per square inch, enough to crush bone outright. But an attack aimed at a person's head and face tends to come as repeated shaking and tearing rather than one clean bite, which is why the soft tissue damage was so extensive while the skull underneath stayed largely intact. He would later describe the sensation as pressure more than pain, his body's own shock response shutting down what it could not process in real time. He stayed conscious through it. He remembers the weight of the animal on top of him and very little else about the seconds that followed. Stang and his son had their own rifles up within moments of the charge. They fired repeatedly into the bear at close range, and the animal came off Perkins and went down for good only a few feet away from him. The two of them then had to control a wound that was bleeding heavily from the face and scalp, using what they had in their packs, while Stang got a call out on a satellite phone for a medevac. A helicopter reached them within the hour and flew Perkins first to Nome, then on to Anchorage for stabilization before the long flight south. Medical findings and aftermath. Perkins spent the next 3 months in a Seattle hospital undergoing reconstructive surgery. Surgeons needed 26 separate operations to rebuild the middle of his face, including a graft taken from his own fibula to reconstruct the missing section of his jaw. The total medical cost exceeded $1 million. The physiology behind a recovery that long comes down to what a grizzly's bite and claws do to the face specifically. Dense, soft tissue and thin bone over the nose and cheeks tear rather than crush, which limits blunt trauma to the skull, but leaves enormous surface wounds that are difficult to close and prone to infection. At 51, Perkins's recovery time ran longer than a younger patient's would have, but his overall condition going into the attack, fit, active, no complicating illness, gave surgeons more to work with than they usually get in maulings this severe. He lost the use of one eye and lives with permanent nerve damage across the reconstructed side of his face, but he returned to hunting, to guiding, and eventually to counseling other mauling survivors through their own recoveries. Incident analysis. What led to this outcome was a single decision that made sense right up until it very suddenly didn't. Perkins had the experience to know the range where a bear stops being a photo subject and becomes a threat. And on almost any other day, the boar might have held its distance the way most grizzlies do when spotted from 70 yards out. The camera in his hand instead of the rifle wasn't recklessness. It was a bet that the animal would behave the way animals usually behave. And this one didn't. Before we look at what worked, it's worth being honest about what didn't. A rifle slung on the back is a rifle that isn't in the fight for the first several seconds of a charge, and those are exactly the seconds that decide everything. What worked was everything that came after the charge started. Stang and his son didn't freeze, didn't hesitate on the shot, and didn't wait to see whether the bear would stop on its own. That response, trained or purely instinctive, it hardly matters which, is the reason there was a survivor to interview afterward, instead of a recovery team. Practical takeaway. If a bear is close enough to fill your camera frame, it's close enough to close the distance in under 2 seconds. Keep the rifle up, not slung. The moment an animal is inside charge range, the photo can wait, the reaction time can't. And never glass bear country alone. Perkins survived because 2 other armed, capable people were standing next to him when the range ran out. 13 years later and 800 miles south, 2 younger hunters would face the same math, this time with a count of every round it took to win it. Riley Hill hangs from a grizzly's jaws. Braxton Myers fires into the animal's skull from 4 feet away. 24 rounds are already going into this bear, and it still hasn't let go. It is September 2024 in the timber outside Island Park, Idaho, and 2 20-year-old hunters are finding out what a 530-pound grizzly can do in the time it takes to draw a sidearm. Hill and Myers had been hunting together most of that week, working timber edges outside Island Park where elk and mule deer dropped down out of the high country ahead of the first hard frost. Neither of them was new to the woods. Both had grown up hunting in eastern Idaho, but neither had drawn on a grizzly before. The Island Park area sits inside grizzly recovery habitat tied to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and encounters there had been climbing for years, though most ended with the bear leaving first. That morning had started cold and clear, frost still holding in the shadows along the creek bottoms even as the sun burned it off higher on the ridges. Hill was working the downwind side of a finger of timber that funneled game toward a spring seep, moving slow, checking wind with a puff bottle every few minutes the way he'd been taught. Myers was 50 yards back, covering a parallel trail through thicker brush. Neither of them had cut fresh bear sign that morning. No tracks, no diggings, nothing to suggest a grizzly was bedded in the brush directly ahead. This one didn't. Hill was working a game trail with his bow up when the grizzly came out of heavy brush at close range. Close enough that there was no time to draw an arrow, let alone place one. He dropped the bow and pulled a 10mm handgun from his hip holster, firing once into the bear's right side as it closed the last of the distance. He got 3 more rounds into its face and shoulder before it reached him. At that range, under 20 feet when the bear broke cover, a charging grizzly closes the gap in well under 2 seconds, faster than a shooter can find and fire a precisely placed follow-up shot. None of it stopped the charge. The bear's jaws closed on his right forearm and lifted him off his feet. Hill would later compare it to a dog with a rope toy, except the rope toy was his arm, and the dog weighed 530 pounds. He felt his skin split to the bone, and the animal shaking him the way a predator shakes something it intends to kill. Myers was already moving. He got his own weapon up and began firing into the bear's head and spine from close range, round after round, working to break something the animal wasn't going to stop fighting through on its own. It took most of a magazine. At some point in the middle of it, Hill felt the bear's grip loosen, whether from a hit or from the animal shifting its focus, and he used the half-second to tear his arm free of the jaws. He got back to his feet and fired 3 more rounds into the bear's head before it finally went down for good. Between the two of them, Hill and Myers had put 24 rounds into the animal. The bear went still on the ground a few feet from where Hill had fallen. For a moment, neither man moved. Myers still had his sights on the carcass, and Hill was on the ground trying to work out how much of his arm was still attached. The forearm was laid open from wrist to elbow, muscle visible through the sleeve, and blood was already soaking through the fabric fast enough that Myers could see it from where he stood. With the bear down, Myers turned to the wound. He wrapped Hill's shirt around the forearm and cinched 2 belt tourniquets above it to control the bleeding, then got a call out for evacuation. Hill stayed conscious through all of it, still working out what had just happened to his arm. Medical findings and aftermath. Hill's forearm required emergency surgery to repair torn muscle and control bleeding from puncture wounds that reached the bone. A grizzly's bite generates several hundred pounds of pressure per square inch, and combined with the twisting motion of a bear trying to control what it's bitten, the result is less a clean wound than a shredding injury. Muscle and tendon torn along the length of the bite, rather than cut cleanly. At 20, Hill's youth worked in his favor. Healthy tissue, strong circulation, and no underlying conditions gave him a recovery margin that an older victim wouldn't have had. He kept the arm, regained most of its function after months of physical therapy, and returned to hunting the following season. The scarring is permanent, and nerve sensation in 2 fingers has not fully returned, but measured against what a 530-pound grizzly can do to a limb it has fully seized. The outcome was as good as outcomes get. Incident analysis. What put Hill in a grizzly's jaws in the first place was proximity, not carelessness. Bow hunters work close by necessity, and a bear breaking from heavy brush inside archery range gives almost no window to react before contact. That part of the chain isn't really a mistake. It's the cost of hunting the way bow season requires. What kept this from becoming a fatality was everything that happened after contact. Hill had a sidearm on his hip in addition to his bow, which isn't universal practice among bow hunters and probably should be. He used it before the bear ever reached him, which slowed the animal down even though it didn't stop the charge. And Myers didn't hesitate, didn't lose his nerve watching his hunting partner get shaken by an animal 5 times his body weight. He kept firing until the threat was actually neutralized, not just until it looked neutralized. Idaho Fish and Game's investigation credited exactly that combination, an immediate armed response, and a second person capable of delivering it. Practical takeaway. If you hunt grizzly country with a bow, carry a sidearm too, and carry it somewhere you can reach faster than you can knock an arrow. Bow range and bear charge range overlap more than most hunters plan for, and never hunt alone in bear-dense terrain. The second gun in this story is very possibly the reason there's a first-person account of it at all. Nearly 6 decades earlier, in a national park 1,000 miles to the northeast, 2 teenage girls would face a very different kind of grizzly threat. one that had been building, unnoticed, for years before that single night. Julie Helgeson decided to spread her sleeping bag on the ground outside Granite Park Chalet instead of inside it. 4 hours later, a grizzly bear pulled her 50 yards down the slope and left her to bleed to death in the dark. She was 19, working her second summer at the Chalet, high in Glacier National Park's backcountry on the Montana side of the Continental Divide. She'd come out from Minnesota for a second summer of the seasonal work Chalet employees took for the free room, the tips, and the chance to spend a season in the high country most tourists only saw for an afternoon. Roy Ducat, a co-worker the same age, was in the sleeping bag next to hers, a few feet off, on a patch of open ground about 100 yards from the chalet itself. Sleeping outside on hot August nights had become an informal habit among the chalet's young summer staff. A break from the bunkhouse, a chance to see stars at 6,800 feet. Nobody with the authority to stop the practice had stopped it. The evening of August 12th had been warm even after sunset, the kind of night that made the bunkhouse feel unnecessary. Guests had eaten dinner on the chalet porch and gone to bed by 10. Helgeson and Ducat carried their sleeping bags out past the generator shed sometime after the last of the staff work was done, laid them out on a patch of open ground, and talked for a while before turning in. A few hundred yards away, behind the kitchen, that summer's garbage pit sat uncovered, the way it had most nights all season. What none of the staff sleeping outside that August night fully understood was what had been happening behind the chalet for years. Granite Park, like several backcountry lodges in the park at the time, had a long-standing habit of dumping food scraps and garbage a short distance from the building, close enough that guests could sit on the porch after dinner and watch bears come in to feed. It was treated as an attraction. By 1967, a specific sow grizzly had become a regular at the dump, increasingly comfortable around the buildings and increasingly indifferent to the presence of people. Rangers had already flagged the animal as food conditioned. The chalet kept operating the same way it always had. Employees who'd been at Granite Park all summer had seen the same bear dozens of times, always at dusk, always working the same stretch of ground behind the kitchen. It had stopped running when people came out onto the porch to watch. By August, staff had started pointing her out to guests by sight, the way you'd point out a regular customer, not as a warning, but as part of the evening's entertainment. On the night of August 12th, that bear came through the camp where Helgeson and Ducat were sleeping. It found Ducat first, biting down on his head and shoulder. He stayed still and silent, and the bear moved off him toward Helgeson. She screamed, and the bear seized her and began dragging her down the slope away from the chalet, through brush and rock. For a distance searchers later measured at roughly 50 yards. Ducat, still down where the bear had left him, could hear her screaming the whole way down the slope, and then, after a while, could not. Other staff, woken by the screaming, got a radio call out for help, but rescue crews take time to reach a chalet 6 miles from the nearest trailhead in the dark. It took hours to organize a search party and move them up the dark trail with flashlights, and hours more after that to find her in the brush below the chalet. When a search team finally located Helgeson, she was still alive. She died a short time later from blood loss, before she could be moved down to a hospital. Almost the same hour, several miles away at Trout Lake, a second, unrelated grizzly attacked a group of campers sleeping in the open and killed 19-year-old Michelle Coons in her sleeping bag. 2 fatal attacks, 2 different bears, the same night, in the same park. Both animals with a documented history of feeding on human garbage. Medical findings and aftermath. Helgeson's death came from massive blood loss following extensive lacerations and puncture wounds sustained during the 50-yard drag. Trauma consistent with a mature grizzly's bite force and claws working over an extended, resisted attack rather than a single strike. In an era before helicopter medevac was standard in backcountry Glacier, The 6-mile distance between Granite Park Chalet and the nearest road access meant that even a rescue team reaching her in time to find her alive could not reach a hospital in time to save her. Dukat, bitten on the head and shoulder before the bear moved on to Helgeson, survived his injuries and later credited staying still with ending the attack on him early. The park's after-action review found no single point where a faster medical response alone would have changed the outcome. The wound pattern itself, combined with the remoteness of the location, made her injuries close to unsurvivable once the attack began. Incident analysis. What led to this outcome was a chain of decisions that each made sense on their own at the time. Sleeping outside on a warm August night wasn't reckless by the standards Glacier's own staff operated under that summer. Dumping food scraps near a backcountry chalet wasn't an unusual practice either. It was standard operating procedure at multiple lodges in the park, treated as a guest amenity rather than a hazard. Neither Helgeson nor Dukat had any way of knowing a specific, food-conditioned bear had spent weeks growing more comfortable around exactly the spot where they chose to sleep. That's the part this incident actually exposed. The failure wasn't a single bad choice by a 19-year-old employee. It was a park-wide policy of feeding bears for entertainment, repeated at chalet after chalet for years, that had quietly built a population of animals with no fear of the people camped around them. Within a year of this night, the National Park Service ended open garbage feeding across its bear country parks, a policy shift this exact case is largely credited with forcing. Practical takeaway. Never camp near a known food source, garbage or otherwise, even one a chalet or campground treats as normal. A bear conditioned to associate people with food loses its fear of people first. If you're staying anywhere in bear country with a history of animals hanging around the buildings, sleep inside, not outside, no matter how nice the night is. Nothing about the landscape tells you a bear has stopped being afraid of you. Only the bear does, and usually too late. 4.5 decades later, and 1,000 miles northwest in Alaska's own tundra, a solo hiker's own camera would capture the final minutes before an animal crossed that same invisible line. This time, with no one else there to see it happen. The gravel bar along the Toklat River runs pale and wide under the August sun, braided glacial channels catching light in 100 places at once. By late afternoon, the wind off the Alaska Range carries a mineral cold, even when the air itself sits close to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and the willow brush along the banks holds just enough moisture to smell faintly of decay. Half a mile downstream, a grizzly boar was working the same gravel bar alone, unhurried, and not yet aware it had company. Richard White walked out onto that gravel bar on August 24th, 2012, carrying a digital camera and looking for exactly what he found. He was 49, a solo backpacker from San Diego on a multi-day permit trip through Denali National Park's backcountry, 3 miles south of the park road in country that sees more bears than people. Friends back home described him as meticulous, the kind of hiker who filed his exact route with rangers and checked in by satellite messenger every evening, which was part of why searchers were able to narrow down where to look within a day of him missing one. Denali requires backcountry permits precisely because so much of the park is functionally unmanaged bear habitat. Rangers assign travel corridors, brief every group on bear behavior, and expect hikers to self-report sightings. White had gone through that briefing like everyone else that week. He was traveling alone, carrying several days of food in bear-resistant containers, moving along the braided gravel of the Toklat drainage where visibility runs for miles in either direction. Exactly the kind of open terrain considered safer than thick brush, because there's nothing to hide an approach on either side. White was experienced. He had hiked Denali's backcountry before, understood the permit system's warnings about bear encounters, and knew the posted rule as well as any ranger could recite it. Stay at least a quarter mile from a bear, and leave the area if one closes that distance. On the afternoon of August 24th, he broke that rule, and the record of exactly how he broke it survived him. White's camera time-stamped every frame. Investigators later used those stamps, combined with satellite imagery of the gravel bar, to reconstruct what happened over the next 7.5 minutes. He took 26 photographs of the bear during that window, working steadily closer with a zoom lens rather than backing away, until rangers estimated he was standing roughly 40 yards from the animal, about 10 times closer than the minimum distance backcountry travelers are told to keep. For most of that window, the bear kept feeding, apparently indifferent to him. Grizzlies feeding on a gravel bar in August are usually working roots, ground squirrels, or late-season berries, burning calories ahead of a winter they can't survive without enough fat reserve, behavior that keeps their attention down and close to the ground, rather than up and scanning for threats, which is likely part of why White could close the distance the way he did without triggering an earlier reaction. Photo timestamps suggest the bear reacted to his presence only in the final few seconds before contact. The camera's last usable frame shows its head already turned toward him. Rangers began a ground and air search the following morning after White missed his scheduled check-in, working outward from his last reported waypoint along the Toklat drainage. It took search teams most of that day to reach the gravel bar itself, moving on foot through braided river channels that shift week to week and can't always be crossed where a map says they can. No one else was on that stretch of river. What happened next is reconstructed entirely from physical evidence rangers found the following day. White's body on the gravel bar, then a drag trail leading roughly 150 yards into dense brush, where the bear had partially buried him and returned to feed. Behavior wildlife biologists associate with an animal that has begun treating a body as a food source rather than simply eliminating a perceived threat. Alaska wildlife troopers located the bear still guarding the cache site the next day and killed it there. Park staff closed the Toklat corridor for a week afterward. Standard procedure anytime a fatality involves a bear that may still be in the area, while rangers walked the gravel bar collecting the evidence that would let them reconstruct, almost minute by minute, exactly how close White had gotten and when. Medical findings and aftermath. Because there were no witnesses, investigators had to reconstruct cause of death from the recovery scene rather than a survivor's account. The wound pattern and the caching behavior, dragging the body off the open gravel bar and returning to it, are markers biologists associate with a bear that moved from a defensive or investigative encounter into treating the victim as prey, a shift that can happen within minutes once an attack begins and blood is present. White's death would have come quickly relative to the length of the overall encounter, though the exact sequence of the attack itself could not be reconstructed from the scene alone. This was the first confirmed fatal bear mauling in Denali National Park's recorded history, a span of more than 90 years, which is part of why the case drew the level of forensic scrutiny it did. Incident analysis. What led to this outcome was a distance violation, and it's a specific, measurable one. The quarter-mile rule exists because it's roughly the range at which most bears will simply continue what they're doing without feeling pressured to react. 40 yards is not that range. A zoom lens creates the illusion of safe distance without changing the actual distance, and White's own photographs are the clearest evidence of how steadily he closed that gap instead of backing off once he had his shot. There isn't an effective action side to this case the way there is in an incident with a survivor. Nobody was there to do anything differently in the moment. What Denali's rangers did afterward mattered more. They used his own camera as physical evidence to reconstruct exactly how the encounter developed, and that reconstruction became one of the clearest documented examples of how photography itself can pull a hiker closer to a bear one frame at a time, without it ever feeling like a decision. Practical takeaway. A telephoto lens is not a safety buffer. It changes what you see, not how close you actually are. If you need to move to get the shot, you are already too close. Set your distance before you raise the camera, not after, and treat the quarter-mile rule as a hard line instead of a suggestion you can edge past one photo at a time. A century earlier and half a world away, a very different bear would not wait for anyone to wander into range. It would come looking, house by house, for 6 straight days. Mayu is alone in the farmhouse when the bear comes through the wall. Her foster son, 6-year-old Mikio, is asleep in the next room. By the time anyone from the settlement reaches the house, both of them are already dead. It is December 9th, 1915, in the pioneer settlement of Sankebetsu Rokusen-sawa, deep in the snow-heavy forests of northern Hokkaido, and the bear that did this one has not finished yet. Sankebetsu Rokusen-sawa was barely a decade old that winter, a scatter of farmhouses cut into forest 11 kilometers inland from Hokkaido's west coast, settled by mainland Japanese families who had come north for cheap land under a national resettlement program and found instead some of the densest brown bear country in the world. Snow was already deep by early December, the kind of season that pushes bears toward their winter dens and, in a hungry year, toward whatever calorie source is easiest to reach first. Livestock pens and grain stores sat close to the houses, with no real buffer of cleared ground between the settlement and the tree line. The bear that walked into Mayu's house that December evening was already known before it arrived. Villagers in a neighboring settlement had blamed the same animal, identifiable by a pale diagonal blaze running from its shoulder to its chest, a marking that resembled the sash of a Buddhist priest's robe, which is how it earned the name Kesagake, for the deaths of several women earlier that year. It was a male, roughly 750 pounds and nearly 9 feet standing on its hind legs, 7 or 8 years old, and by the standards of Ezo brown bears on Hokkaido, unusually large, big enough that the footprints it left in the season's first snow measured wider than a grown man's boot laid sideways. It took corn and a portion of stored fish from Mayu's house before turning on her and the boy, a sequence investigators later reconstructed from the state of the pantry, the scattered grain sacks, and the position of the bodies when neighbors finally reached the house. After that first attack, a hunting party from Sankebetsu went after the bear and wounded it without finishing the job. A mistake that, by the account passed down through the settlement, only sharpened the animal's aggression rather than driving it off. The bear, evidently uninjured enough to keep moving normally despite the wound, went quiet for 5 days, long enough that some households believed it had moved on for good. Children went back to walking to the neighboring farmhouse unescorted. Men who had spent the week armed and watching the tree line went back to ordinary work. On December 14th, it came back. This time it struck during a wake, while villagers had gathered at a neighboring house to mourn Mayu and Mikio. It came through a wall the same way it had at Mayu's house, and the people inside had seconds, not minutes, to react. It broke into the gathering and killed a pregnant woman, Take, and 2 3-year-old boys, injuring several more villagers who tried to fight it off with farm tools rather than firearms. Most of the men capable of a rifle shot were still out in the forest searching for an animal they believed they had already driven away. By the time it was over, 6 days after the first attack, the bear had killed 7 people and injured 3 more across a settlement of only a few dozen households. Word of the second attack finally reached the men still searching the forest, and by the next morning, Sankebetsu had all but emptied itself of anyone willing to walk between houses after dark. It took a specialist to end it. A local hunter named Yamamoto Heikichi, who had studied the bear's movements and understood its habits better than the search parties chasing it through the trees, tracked it to a resting spot beside a Japanese oak. He closed to within 20 meters and fired twice. The first shot through the heart, the second through the head. The 6-day series of attacks ended there, in the snow beside that tree, with the bear's hide and skull later put on display in the village as proof, for anyone still afraid to leave their house, that it was actually over. Medical findings and aftermath. The injuries across all 10 victims were consistent with a mature male brown bear well over 700 pounds, working at close range inside confined farmhouse spaces, where there was little room to retreat, and almost no chance to reach a weapon before contact. In rural Hokkaido in 1915, there was no telegraph line into the settlement and no road passable in December. Even victims who survived the initial attack faced days before any doctor could reach them, which is part of why 3 of the 10 who were struck did not survive their wounds, even after the bear itself was dead. The earlier wounding of the bear by the first hunting party is itself a documented pattern in bear conflict cases. An animal hurt but not killed often becomes more dangerous, not less, and modern wildlife agencies still train responders around exactly that risk. Incident analysis. What led to this outcome was less a single decision than a settlement built without any real buffer between farmhouses and an active brown bear population. In a decade when nobody in the Japanese homestead program was tracking bear movement the way Hokkaido's indigenous Ainu hunters already did. The first hunting party's mistake compounded that. Wounding a several hundred-pound predator and treating the job as finished is a failure that shows up again and again in bear conflict records from every era and country, not just 1915 Hokkaido. What actually ended it was specialist knowledge, not numbers. A village's worth of armed men searching the forest accomplished less than one hunter who understood exactly where and how the bear rested. That is the part of this case worth sitting with. When a fed, wounded, or repeat offending bear is involved, the answer usually is not more guns in the woods. It is the right person with the right knowledge, close enough to make one shot count. Practical takeaway. Never assume a wounded bear is a dead bear or a driven-off bear. Treat every non-fatal hit as an animal that is now more dangerous, not less. And if a specific bear has already been connected to human deaths in an area, that information needs to move faster than the bear does, to every household within its range. 84 years later and across the Pacific, on a scrap of timbered island near Kodiak, a single, much older hunter would face down one bear at a range of inches, with nothing in his hand but a knife. Gene Mo lost between 5 and 10 pounds of flesh from his thigh in a single bite. His surgeon simply stopped counting stitches at 500. His son puts the real number closer to a full 1,000. It took one knife, no working firearm, and roughly 2 minutes for a 600-pound brown bear to nearly kill a 69-year-old man. It happened on the morning of November 1st, 1999, on Raspberry Island in the Kodiak archipelago of Alaska. Mo was out that day with 3 other hunters, working the island's timber for Sitka black-tailed deer during the fall season. Raspberry Island sits inside some of the densest brown bear habitat in North America. The same rich salmon and berry ecosystem that produces Kodiak bears twice the size of interior grizzlies. And every hunter who works it in the fall knows the trade-off. The deer are there because the food is there, and so is everything else that eats. Salmon streams cut through the island's interior even in November, still drawing bears down out of the high brush to feed before the real cold sets in. By late morning, the group had 1 deer down, and Mo had separated from the others to field dress it in a patch of heavy brush a short distance off the trail. The kind of thick, sound-deadening cover common across the island's interior, where visibility drops to a few feet in any direction and a charging animal can close the last of its distance before anyone downwind even hears it move. He had leaned his rifle against a tree a few steps away to free both hands for the knife work, a habit as old as field dressing itself, and one that has put more hunters in exactly Mo's position than almost any other single decision in bear country. He was maybe 15 feet from the rifle, close enough that on an ordinary day, it wouldn't have mattered. He never got the chance to reach it. The bear came out of the brush already close, drawn, most likely, by the smell of the fresh kill carrying through the timber, and hit him before he had time to stand or call out to the others. What Mo had in his hand was a fixed-blade hunting knife, and he used it the only way that made sense with several hundred pounds of animal on top of him. He drove it into the side of the bear's neck and drove it in again, twisting the blade each time rather than pulling it straight out, working by feel more than sight with the animal's weight pinning him into the brush and its breath and blood already down the side of his face. The bear came off him for a moment. Pain, not surrender, before diving for his leg and clamping down on his thigh. When it pulled back, it took a chunk of muscle with it, by Mo's own estimate, somewhere between 5 and 10 pounds of tissue torn away in a single bite. He was still fighting when the bear came at him a 3rd time. By then, Mo was losing blood fast and had nothing left to stab with that the bear had not already pulled out of reach or knocked loose in the brush. With nothing left in his hand to fight with, he did the only thing left. he hit it, bare-handed, across the snout as hard as a dying grip could still manage. The bear went down into the snow and brush and did not get back up to finish it. It retreated into the timber and left him there, bleeding, alone for the few minutes it took the others to reach him. The other 3 hunters, drawn by the noise, found him within a few minutes, packed the wound as best they could with what was in their packs, and got a call out for evacuation. It still took time for a float plane to reach Raspberry Island and fly him to a hospital in Kodiak. And Mo stayed conscious for most of it, aware of exactly how much blood he'd lost and how far he still had to go. Medical findings and aftermath. Mo's wounds required close to 1,000 stitches by his son's count, along with 2 separate skin grafts to close the thigh wound where the muscle had been torn away. The physiology behind an injury that extensive is straightforward. A brown bear's claws open multiple long lacerations across a wide area in seconds, while a single bite from jaws that size can remove muscle tissue the way Mo's did rather than simply puncturing it. At 69, his age worked against a fast recovery. Older tissue heals slower and carries higher infection risk over wounds that large. But his overall fitness for a man his age, combined with the other hunters reaching him quickly and getting him off the island fast, kept the blood loss from becoming fatal in a wound that, left untreated even a short while longer on a remote island, likely would have been. He spent roughly a month in rehabilitation and made what his doctors called a full recovery. Incident analysis. What put Mo within reach of that bear was ordinary practice, not a mistake anyone would flag in the moment. Leaning a rifle against a tree to free both hands for field dressing is standard procedure for hunters across Alaska, done thousands of times a season without incident. The problem is that it only takes one bear drawn in by the smell of a fresh kill to turn standard procedure into the reason there is no time to reach the gun at all. What kept this from ending differently was Mo himself. He did not freeze, and he did not try to simply cover up and wait it out. He used the one weapon he had immediately available, worked it with real intent rather than a panicked jab, and kept fighting through a second and third charge when a lot of people would have had nothing left to give. A hunting knife is not a substitute for a rifle, but used decisively at the range this fight happened at. It was the difference between a mauling and a fatality. Practical takeaway. When field dressing game in bear country, keep the rifle within arm's reach the entire time, not leaning against a tree a few steps away. A fresh kill draws bears fast, often faster than hunters expect, and carry a full-size fixed-blade knife as a genuine backup, not just a butchering tool. Mo's decisive use of his is very possibly the only reason this story has an ending instead of a headline. He was back in the field dressing deer within 2 seasons, rifle within arm's reach the whole time. Look across all 6 of these cases, and the pattern isn't bad luck. It's proximity. A camera instead of a rifle. A habit carried a few feet too far from where it should have stayed. A bear left wounded instead of finished. None of these people were careless by the standards of the people around them. They were just standing in the one place at the one moment where the standard wasn't enough. If you spend real time in bear country, subscribe for more case-by-case breakdowns of what actually happened and what the evidence says about why. Stay safe out there.
Hey, we need your help. If you've loved these terrifying true stories so far, we need your help to keep sharing them and create new episodes every week. Please grab your phone, scan the QR code now, and tap the subscribe button that opens on your screen.